What's up, Joe? How you doing today?
Living the dream, as always.
I love it. I love it, man. So I'm super excited to be here. Before we get into the full video, and I think it's important for you to tell people, especially the MSP community, who you are, what you do, and I guess how you help people. And I got a nice little list of questions here that I'm sure I'm just kidding. You're very prepared for, and it's probably nothing you haven't seen before. But I think it's going to be really good to answer a lot of these questions because I keep hearing them time and time again about insurance and whatnot. So take a moment, introduce yourself. What do you do? How you do it? And how you got into this place.
Sure. So started life as an IT in the Navy on the enlisted side. Then I went to the Naval Academy, got my degree in robotics because I'm also a giant nerd. So we were talking about my Lego DeLorean. I also have Lego.
I saw them.
Darth Vader helmets.
Yep.
And then a bunch of like tchotchkes from being in the Navy. So then I was a naval officer a while. Did a bunch of like interesting technical things within the Navy. And then when I got out, it was really my thoughts were med school or law school.
Okay.
And I ended up in the insurance world, although I later did actually end up going to law school. Got my master's in cybersecurity law. Wrote the best-selling book in the nation on the topic of cyber insurance and cybersecurity law. I got published in a bunch of magazines. You can find me on my YouTube channel where I put stuff out. So you just YouTube my name, Joseph Brunsman.
Yep. We'll leave a link down below too for those of you guys that want to go check out his channel.
Cool. And then I also do Reddit. So I'm Joe_cyber.
Yep.
On Reddit. Probably not the best name. Maybe it should have been like Joe Insurance or something like that. But I hadn't planned any of this out. I'm not that smart. So I just really love working with MSPs, and I get to go, speak at all the big, Kaseya is one of them, but like ConnectWise and Vision Conference and all that stuff. So yeah, they'll probably see me on the speaking circuit as well, just trying to add value and help MSPs because it's a crazy world out there.
That it is. It is 100% a crazy world. So that's cool. That's a good story. And what made you decide to go from law to insurance? What was that like?
Oh, well, I actually went the other way because
to insurance to law.
Yeah, so pure nepotism is when I left the Navy, right? So I'm almost 30 by this point, been in the Navy for over a decade. And I'm like, man, what do I do now that I'm grown up? Like, what do I do with myself? And long story short, my father-in-law actually had also been a Naval Academy grad. He left the Navy, got into insurance. And so he goes, hey, Joe, why don't you just come try this? If you don't like it, no harm, no foul. Well, this may be a side story here, but I almost quit the insurance world in the first 6 months because I was just so disgusted with how this industry operates and a complete lack of knowledge or expertise. But anyway, so I ended up actually going to law school because there were just a bunch of insurance questions and legal questions specifically around the cyber world I just could not figure out. So I used my GI Bill. So I was like, oh, well, I get free school and technically I get paid to go to school. So I was like, maybe these guys have the answers. And as it turned out, my Google Foo was actually pretty good because I got there and, we're learning kind of like the fundamentals. And I'm like, hey, that's cool. But like, hey, here's this really kind of niche, nerdy insurance law question and cyber law question. Turned out that 99% of the questions, there was actually no answer. So the case law just hadn't developed yet.
Sure.
And then they also made me take a remedial writing course, which I will forever hate them for because my undergrad was in engineering.
Thank God for Grammarly. That is one bill I will pay for till I die, and I'm okay with that.
Oh, well, like I grew up skipping school, and I'd go two places. I'd go to the school library or the school computer lab, right? So like, I mean, I barely graduated high school, like barely graduated high school. And so like, I distinctly remember where on one side of the screen, it's like I have some assignment due at midnight, and it's like find the following 10 prepositions. So that's on like the left side of my screen. And on the right side of my screen is the managing editor of this nationwide magazine. And we're just like chatting through kind of like last minute stuff
Sure.
to publish my next article. And I was just like, this is this is so dumb. I was like, I can't believe this is a thing.
Pre-chat GPT days when you couldn't just have something write it for you.
Oh, thank God for AI, because I think it's going to, that's a whole different conversation, but I think it'll fundamentally transform school.
Sure.
Back into like, you're going to have to know things as opposed to, just kind of like rote memorization, and then you throw it up for a test and then you completely forget about it. So I think AI might actually be a godsend as far as education goes.
Sure. That I believe. So cool. That's a great story, man. And then you just went through the whole process and got the degrees. And now, did you ever have and I know that you were in the insurance game, but did you ever have were you a practicing lawyer for a long period of time, or you just were like, hey, I want to learn the law and then go back to insurance?
Yeah, I was still doing insurance while I was going to school.
Okay.
Because the Navy makes you feel guilty when you're sleeping, so I don't sleep much. But there were just questions I couldn't figure out.
Okay.
Really nerdy, niche questions I don't think anybody would want to hear about here. But like that was my path to say, okay, is there something here that I just don't know? Turned out, I mean, there's still, it's like the more you know about something, the less you know about something.
Oh, yes.
Right? Kind of a deal where you
100%.
become very, like, when you start getting cognizant of all the things that just there are not answers to.
Hey, that's how I got to start. Went on YouTube and there was a whole bunch of questions that I had and nobody had answers. So that's how that's how it all happened.
Yeah. And I mean, funny enough, like everybody told me it was just a waste of time. They're like, there's no money in this. Nobody cares. And this is back in 2018, 2017, when I was going through school. And so, back then, like I couldn't pay people to listen to me talk about this stuff, but I just thought it was super cool. I'm like, this is really interesting.
Sure.
And so I'd like to think that I had this like great master plan mapped out, but I think it's like most things in life where you're like, hey, I'm really interested. I'm really passionate about this thing. I just want to learn more about it. And it just happened to evolve into something a lot bigger than myself.
That's cool. That's cool. So, and I appreciate that journey big time. I think that's really interesting. So now I guess tell people, right, tie it all together, what you do. And obviously I know who you help and all that, but tell the people who you help and how you help them and some of, I guess, the commonalities. And then I'll start drilling through some of these questions here. But I think the story is really important because I think it lays out a nice groundwork of how you've gotten here. But, what are you doing now and how'd you get, to this exact moment, I guess?
Yeah. So the simple answer is I'm just an insurance guy. I do all these other, like my YouTube channels and my books and going out and speaking, stuff like that. I just do it because I'm just so damn happy that people are interested in like all this knowledge running around in my brain. But in a simple sense, like I'm just an insurance guy. So I help MSPs with their insurance. So tech E&O, EPLI, the professional lines of insurance, D&O is another one. And then I also do cyber insurance for all different types of companies.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. And you don't practice any law anymore. Are you still barred?
No. Never passed the bar.
Oh, all right. So you just went to law school just to learn law. I
didn't want to become an attorney because I did not want to live my life 6 minutes at a time where they have to bill everything.
Yep.
It's even at that time, like let's say I wanted to get a JD and actually go be an attorney and practice in the data privacy area. At the time, like there were still states where that was not even a recognized practice area for an attorney. And so even if you were really interested and you knew a whole bunch about that stuff, you couldn't even like put it on your website that data privacy law was a practice area, which is one of the reasons that I try to put out so much free material, is because, you know, one, a lot of SMBs, they just either A, can't even find a guy who focuses on this area, or it would just be prohibitively expensive. Right. Okay. So even like, you know, even basic questions like, hey, what breach notification law applies to your business after some type of cyber event? Really basic question. It's a really complex answer, because not only do you have, of course, all of like, you know, federal laws, there's contractual issues, but then generally the state law that applies is where your clients are residents of. Okay. Right. So let's imagine you're an accounting firm in Florida, and you have a bunch of snowbirds that come down from all over the country, and you just happen to do their taxes. Gotcha. Right. Well, you may have to adhere to all 50 different state and territory breach notification laws. And then built within a lot of those laws are data security requirements. And so, wow. Okay. It's kind of like as a kind of a tie into this. Sure. So where you're located has a massive play. Sorry, I'm cutting you off, but so where you're located has a massive effect on the laws that you have to abide by. Where your clients are residents of. Oh, okay. Right. So, and that's something that, that's just like a little nugget of knowledge that I'm like, hey, MSPs, take this little nugget of knowledge and go, client, do you know where your clients are residents of? And that'll probably start raising some eyebrows. And then it's very simple where the MSP goes, hey, well, you know, I'm not your attorney, but like, let's look at the Massachusetts law. If you have a Massachusetts client, right? That's 201 CMR 17. There's 18 different technical, administrative, and physical safeguards you have to have in place if you have even one Massachusetts resident as a client, regardless of where your business is located, right? So it's like, I think the more that MSPs get savvy on some of the data security law stuff, right, the more that they can go to their clients and say, hey, I'm not the bad guy just trying to sell you another widget that you probably don't understand. Sure. Right? It's, hey, these are what the bad guys say you have to do, right? Like, let's solve that problem together, right? If the AG of Massachusetts or the AG of New York with the SHIELD Act and on and on and on. AG, what does AG mean? Oh, I'm sorry, Attorney General. Okay, good. Right, so if the Attorney General, if they're saying you have to do this, if this is what the state laws are saying, let's work together to solve that problem, right? Gotcha. I think that's it's a much simpler approach for an MSP. Sure. Than to say like, hey, you need EDR. And then the average client goes, well, I already have antivirus. Sure. Right? And then you have to explain AV versus EDR, and it's a giant headache for everybody. So that's good. So let me start with this question, because I know a lot of my audience is for the most part smaller MSPs currently. If you had to give them one piece of advice when it comes to this area, or even a couple pieces of advice, what would be like, hey, this is the most important thing that I could probably give you? You know, if you watch this whole interview, we'll call it, the nugget that they could take, throw it in their back pocket, and leverage it when they need it. Ooh, I would say the more people you help, the more money you make. Right? So and I'll say the more money you make in the long run. Right? So all of these MSPs are phenomenal on the tech side, right? Far eclipsing the average person. Sure. Kind of goes without saying. When it comes to marketing, I'm a firm believer, right? Figure out how to help the most people. Cool. Just make that your goal. Sure. You start helping people, right? The universe has a fun way of instilling karma in all of us, right? 100%. So just find a way to help people. Find something you're interested in. Find a way to help that group with the knowledge that you have, right? Cool. And don't worry about money. That is going to come your way, right? So, and then
more so insurance side, because I like that, and I think that's probably the best thing, and I'm a firm believer of that. As far as insurance goes, to help either mitigate the risk or, when should they get insurance? How much insurance should they be getting? Things of that nature that kind of tie directly into like what you do.
Yeah. Okay. So we have to think of this under the auspices of like defense in depth. So if I just say, hey, MSP, you need insurance, that's like an MSP saying, hey, client, you need a firewall. That's only part of the solution.
Sure.
So I like to think of it as kind of a 3-element approach, which is element number 1 is risk management, risk transference. So I have a whole video on that called Get Smart, Defense in Depth for Your MSP, where I take a bunch of, really, they're just tried and true risk transference mechanisms, right? Which is just a fancy way of saying a newsletter, contractually requiring cyber insurance, always offering a higher level of service, et cetera, et cetera. I took that from other industries where the case law is clear, it's been tried and true. I translated that to MSP, and I said, hey, MSPs, consider this stuff, right? And how it can help you. So that's kind of step 1. Step 2 is contracts. So I would say if you're a small MSP and you don't have contracts, please get contracts. And there's a few players really in this space. You've got Danny Aston out of CRD and CRD. You've got Don Geider. You've got Brad Gross. And you've got Rob Scott with, I think it's Monjour now is the name of his, that side of his business. So it's really like 4 guys that I go, hey, I've seen their work product. I think it's pretty good. You should, consider reaching out to one of them and talk to those guys. Get that contract in place, because if you don't have a contract, 1, getting insurance is going to be way more difficult / way more expensive. But 2, you're setting yourself up for he said, she said. And nobody wants that position.
Sure.
Right. So as far as the contractual language, if you need to, just blame the insurance company. If you're an MSP out there and you've had these clients for 10, 20-ish years, whatever, you've never had a contract, and you're going, hey, how do I even begin to breach that topic? Blame the insurance companies, because they're going to want to see it. I'm going to want to see it. And everybody hates insurance companies anyways. So it's a really,
how'd you know?
Really
who told you
answer.
that?
Oh, I hate insurance companies more than just about anybody else on this planet, because I have to deal with them on a daily basis. So, I'd say that's kind of where they should start. Now, as far as how much insurance do you need? That was
going to be my next question.
So we'd have to kind of narrow that down. We'd have to say, all right, 1, obviously there are many different types of insurance. You got business owners policies, general liability. I have a whole video on my YouTube channel called the Plain Language Insurance Breakdown that just goes through the most common types of insurance and says, hey, in plain English, business owner to business owner, this is generally what this stuff does. Right? So then they'll get an idea of kind of the universe of SMB insurance. If we were going to narrow it down, and we would say specifically tech E&O, so that's technology, errors, and omissions insurance.
Sure.
Which is half E&O, half cyber insurance, squished together, for a very nerdy reason I will spare you from. But there, once again, I have a whole video on that, but there's elements that go into this, right? There's considerations. So I would say, hey, if you just started your MSP, just get $1 million policy, right? That's kind of the benchmark threshold, tech E&O limits. You go from there. Past that point, there's, who are your clients? Do you have contractual obligations? How big are your clients? What's your relationship with them? All that kind of stuff's covered in the video. And then there's also the sleep good at night factor, right? So I have some MSP clients and they just go, hey, I realize you said maybe for that exact MSP, I'm probably good with $1 million, but I want $2 million to just sleep good at night. And it's like, well, thanks for funding my son's Lego habit. I don't see maybe a lot of utility in that for you, but if that's what they need to sleep good at night, then it's what it is.
So at what point through, let's just say a new MSP starting today, right? And they are closing, well, today's Friday at the time of recording this, but you know, when people see this, I don't know exactly just yet, but let's fast forward 7 days, right? They know next Friday they are closing their first, you know, monthly reoccurring contract with a new company. They've got their MSA, they've got their SLA, maybe not fully touched up by a lawyer insurance company, but at least something that lays down, this is what we're doing, this is what we're touching, this is how we're doing it, right? At what point through the journey should they be getting insurance? And what levels of insurance should they be getting?
Okay, so I will say specifically for tech E&O. Now, to give you the technical answer, almost every tech E&O policy now is what's called retro inception. Now, what does that mean in human terms? That means it's going to cover you for the work you perform from the day that policy goes into place. This is assuming you don't have any insurance to begin with, right? It's going to cover you from the day that policy goes into place moving forward. So you don't want to start rendering services to clients with no insurance in place.
Okay.
Right? That's just
because then you're not
a good
covered.
idea.
You're not covered in the past.
Exactly. And then you could get into a situation where you're starting to work with this client, maybe halfway through like setup and implementation, something goes sideways. Maybe you got the insurance halfway through that. So now you have to deal with proportional coverage issues, and maybe this thing you did is covered, but this other thing you did isn't covered. And it just turns into a complete nightmare that is wholly avoidable when the simple answer is, hey, go out, get those clients. I get it. But before you start rendering services, make sure you have that insurance in place.
Cool. And just,
that's what you want to look for.
And I know this is a very broad, or paint a very broad brush stroke, but approximately, what does insurance cost for a one-person startup on average? Doesn't have to be specific, and nobody's going to come chase you down. But if you had to give a ballpark of the lowest number you've ever seen to the highest number you've ever seen, their first customer is 10 to 20 users.
Okay, so I'll say like a business owner's policy or a general liability policy. You're probably looking at, I would set aside $1,000. Anything less than that, call it a win. That's for the year.
Sure.
For tech E&O, just starting off, I'd say set aside $2,500
per year.
Anything less than that's a win. Yep.
Cool.
Yep. Per year. Anything less than that's a win. With the understanding that there's always going to be a lot of variance, right? Now, if let's say you just started an MSP and a nuclear reactor is your first client. I mean, one, that'd probably be a hell of a contract. That's a lot of MRR. So with that,
you got good problems and bad problems, but you got a lot of good problems.
Exactly. So something like that, obviously you're going to spend way more money.
Sure.
And if you're in that position, please call me and I may be able to assist you. No, I'm just kidding. But
that's what it's here for, brother. Give the shameless plug. Yeah. That's the whole point.
Shameless plug. But no, like somebody like that, that one, you got to think that's going to take a long time to put in place. There's a lot of moving parts. It's going to be way more expensive. Whereas, hey, if you're just, and location plays a point in all of this too, geographic location, dealing with kind of case law and stuff like that. But let's say you're like in the middle of Nebraska, right? And you have brand new client, that could be like $2,000 tops for the year. So
gotcha.
Not too bad.
And now, do you have to go back, and I'm asking a lot of very entry level questions. One, because I don't know, but two, I think a lot of my audience would appreciate it, is, up to what level are you covered? And what I mean by that, like level, obviously you have your policy and policy limits, but like, so let's say they are killing it, right? And they're adding 20 new seats that they're going to manage, and one new customer every week. So you're adding about 4 new customers a month, which would be a dream for some people, and 20 seats per customer. So about 80 seats per month, right? And that's a fairly good growth. But do they need to get a new policy with every handful of new customers, or is it kind of like, hey, you get a threshold of this to this? I genuinely don't know, so I'm curious.
Sure. So I'll give you a quick backstory. When I first came into the insurance world, right, working for my father-in-law, he had gotten a master's in finance, and so he worked with a ton of accounting firms. Right, CPA firms primarily, and because he just spoke their language.
Sure.
So I can tell you, because I wrote the only book ever on this topic, and it was a huge waste of time, but I did learn a lot. I can tell you, right, if you're a CPA firm, right, with this band of revenue, right, X percentage of your peers have $1 million in coverage, $2 million in coverage, 3, 4, 5, 10 plus. Right, and that just goes all the way down.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you that. As far as MSPs go, that data just doesn't exist, right? So it's very much, one, you have to consider, okay, if you're growing that quickly, that gets put into the conversation of what I think appropriate limits would be, because now I have to start forecasting forward saying, all right, and this gets somewhat technical, dealing with what type of loss scenario you're trying to avoid. If we're talking about, let's say, supply chain attack, you get hit with ransomware, bad guy goes to your RMM, hits all your clients with ransomware.
Sure.
Right? How does that play out? That would be considered an interrelated act. So we need, at that point, higher limits of insurance, right, to kind of deal with a potential class action claim or interrelated act. But it's really, it's just so vague, frankly, like many things in this world. Like if I asked you, hey, what's the average cost of a ransom event?
Sure.
Nobody really knows, because there's no
it varies tremendously. Yeah.
Yeah. The studies that come out aren't statistically really relevant to most businesses, right? So if you're reading like Ponymon Institute, and most of the people responding to that are these, billion-dollar multinational corporations. That's where they get the old, was it average cost of a data breach is like 3.6 million or something, whatever it was. It's like, the average mom and pop is not going to suffer $3.6 million
Sure.
For a data breach, right? So there's a lot of variables that kind of go into it, and I would just tell everybody here, like, hey, if you don't like me, that's fine. You don't have to talk to me, but find somebody that specializes in this area where you can just sit down and we can go through all those variables, right? And we can say, hey, like revenue is X, but here's my growth rate. And so, your policy is good for a year, and you can't really, absent special circumstances, change that until your next renewal date, right? So if you're forecasting going from 1 million to 5 million this year, or whatever that growth rate would be, that'd be a hell of a growth rate for an MSP. But maybe there's some M&A activity in there, and you just got this crazy marketing engine, and you hit the sweet spot and you're killing it. That's a completely different conversation than the MSP that goes, hey, I have a bunch of SMB clients. They're in XYZ types of industries. This is roughly the services I'm providing. Growth is pretty steady at, maybe 5% a year or something like that, right? Two kind of completely different scenarios.
Gotcha. Okay. And then you would be paying for just that, just for clarification, you'd be paying for that projected future growth. So, hey, we're going to go from 1 million to 5 million at the end of this year. You really want to be covered up to 5 million, especially if you get there a little sooner than you anticipated.
Kind of. So it's not like a 1-for-1 per se in terms of revenue to insurance limits.
Gotcha.
Because arguably, let's say you have a client, they're making 100 million a year, and you just screw the pooch and you destroy their entire business.
Sure.
I'm not going to be able to get you $100 million worth of insurance.
Sure.
That's not going to happen.
Sure.
So there's some practical limitations in that as well. But I would say it's kind of just like an aside for all the MSPs here. One thing a lot of insurance guys don't talk about is during that application process, right? Premium equals rate. So that's a number that pops out based upon all the questions you answer, times gross weighted revenue. All right.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say, you go, hey, I think I'm going to go from 1 million this year to 5 million next year. Right. Well, if you put 5 million in that next year revenue box, you're going to get charged for that, whether you hit it or not. Mm. So I would tell everybody, hey, be truthful but conservative about those projections, because, hey, maybe suddenly a huge study comes out and working from home on average kills you in 5 years. So then everybody goes, oh my God, we got to get back to the office.
Sure.
Or maybe maybe World War III breaks out, or the stock market crashes, or whatever, right? You don't want to be paying a premium on your insurance for revenue that you're never going to realize, right? So be truthful but conservative about how you do that, so that you're not funding some Yahoo's Lego collection for their sons.
Sure. Speaking of Legos, I'm going to take a commercial. Oh, I do. So I was going to share this before, but I do have a Lego Yoda here. It's kind of, this is not the most appropriate, but hey, people can help fund my Lego collection too. I got a little Countach right there next to it, or a Jesco, and I got a fake tree because I killed the last little plant I had up there. But I get it. I totally get it.
Yeah. I would just say I credit Lego. That is the reason I got a degree in engineering and became an engineer.
Oh, I actually believe that. I believe that. It is. I hope that Lego never goes out of business, because I look forward to the day that when I do have kids, I get to buy them endless amounts of Legos and then have to deal with the stepping of them on them, I should say, at a later point in time too.
The old Swedish landmines. Yes.
I have 3 dogs right now. When I walk around the house, two of them have jaws of steel, so we get them the hardest possible treats, or toys, I should say. And stepping on those, especially, you go to the late night bathroom break, that pain level is very high when you're not expecting it. Or almost, I've probably almost broken my ankle more in my house than I have out in the real world. So this is good. So I think this gives people a good understanding of when to get it. How often, or I guess better yet, what is the process from, hey, I know that I'm closing my client, or I want to start an MSP. At what point should they start engaging an insurance company? Like, when should they start to have that conversation? Because obviously, we already spoke about the retroactive. What does that conversation look like? When should they, should it be 6 months out? Should it be a week out, a month out, to where it's not overbearing pressure, but hey, it's probably something I need to throw on my radar?
Yeah. So saying, let's say the scenario is services start in a month, right? That's generally a pretty good time to start that conversation on the insurance side, because there's always a wrinkle somewhere. There's always something, right? Very rarely does, kind of my initial hour-long conversation that then goes to the application, and then a quote pops out the other end with no wrinkle in the middle. So it's something where I say, hey, month out, start that conversation, right? Worst case scenario is you have an insurance policy for, let's say, 2 weeks before you start services. Okay. Well, at least you're covered.
Sure.
Right? The second that you start, you click that mouse, you're covered. It's like, okay, cool. Right? But I'd rather you have insurance a little earlier than a little too late.
Sure. Because especially in the beginning, because you're just starting. You haven't even, you haven't ironed out the processes yet. You're, for lack of a better term, throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks. So that's very interesting.
Exactly.
So about a month out. So that's good to know. And then as far as like, who needs full-blown cyber insurance versus just regular E&O? Should every MSP get cyber insurance? Are there other insurances in which I don't know the names of that they also need? Or is there, do they need workers' comp if it's just themselves? Or at what point do they, obviously I know you need, in some states at least, workers' comp to even have an employee, but what does that look like as well?
Yeah, so, let's say scenario of single guy starting an MSP. Right. Here's what I would say. I would say, all right, there's something called EPLI. That's Employment Practices Liability Insurance. If you don't have employees, there's zero reason that you should get that policy. Like, I can't think of any.
Sure.
Because it doesn't apply to you. It's more about if an employee sues your business. Right? It's the general usage of that type of policy. So I'd say, hey, mark that off your list. Probably don't need it. Then I would say, you should be looking at, really at a minimum, I would say either a general liability or business owner's policy, right? Those deal with bodily injury and property damage. That's what they deal with, right? One is third parties, that'd be like your clients. You put a hole in a wall somewhere it's not supposed to go. The latter is same thing I just said, plus your own property and your own property damage. Right. So like if you're just a guy, you're starting an MSP maybe in your house and you're growing it organically, then I would say, hey, get your general liability policy. If for no other reason than one, they're dirt cheap. Two, you're probably never going to use it, but you'll probably see it on a contractual requirement somewhere. Right. So I'd say start there. Then I would say, hey, get that tech E&O policy to cover you for the services you're rendering, right? Because they're still, believe it or not, pretty affordable. So I know MSPs are like, oh my God, this has gotten so expensive.
Sure.
Oh, you ain't seen nothing yet. Like
it's gonna get worse.
You're not even close to what your peers in other white collar professions are spending. Like if you're if you're like a sole proprietor, architect / engineer. Sure. That's $10,000. That's just baseline. Yeah, you're paying 10 grand a year, baseline.
Just right?
Very, very common term.
Sure.
Yeah, right? It's just baked into the cost. So hopefully it won't get that expensive, but get your tech, and then from there, you could probably start looking at, I don't know, commercial auto, maybe if you're, you have like a work truck or something like that.
Sure.
If you're kind of bootstrapping it, I'd say, hey, start with your general liability, your tech, and then, the other insurance policies have their place and their probability of use. As a fellow business owner, I'd say you're probably better off spending that money on coffee because you're going to be up for some late nights as opposed to spending money on insurance in many regards.
Sure. Now, what about an MSSP, a more security focused, and I know that even the term MSSP, and I have a thriving Discord now of people, but there's definitely some people that focus very heavily on security. They are threat hunters. They are, the people doing, we'll call it the dirty work, that are getting into the code and finding where the breaches are and all that kind of stuff and where the threats lie and all that, versus the MSSP. And I don't love that it's such a loose term, but more the guy that's like, hey, we're not going to do EDR, but we're going to take, we're going to make sure that you have, more advanced levels, or we're going to get Huntress involved or something of that nature where you have, it's definitely higher than just endpoint, right? But it's not quite as crazy as like a threat hunter per se. What do you recommend that they get, or should they start with, or, if they're starting an MSSP instead of an MSP, what do they actually need?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So there's kind of two parts to that question, as I see it. So I guess the easy answer is you have to get a tech E&O policy. Now, that being said, there's a deeper discussion there about what that policy actually covers you for.
Hmm.
Now, this is where everybody has to start getting really careful, right? Because, I mean, how many people read their insurance policies? To be fair,
Probably not enough.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I have never read my car insurance policy.
Yeah.
I get it through USAA. Dude, car insurance is car insurance is car insurance.
Mm-hmm.
Written by ISO, super heavily regulated. One of my professors in school was the former insurance commissioner for the state of Maryland.
Oh, wow.
Right? Like they got that stuff locked down.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when it comes to tech E&O, man, that's the Wild West. That is a niche of a niche of a niche product within the insurance world.
Okay.
Like, you really have to know what you're looking at. And you also have to know, I mean, somewhat unfortunately, for most businesses out there, what those words actually mean in practice. Right?
In practice, meaning in front of a lawyer or something of that nature.
Well, like in the real world.
Okay.
So if I said, hey, Harrison, you're an MSP, here's your policy.
Mm-hmm.
And you go, okay, cool. I have coverage. I have a tech E&O policy. I'm going to go do VCIO services. Right? I would say, well, there's a managed control operate exclusion on your policy. And you would look at me sideways and you go, what are you talking about?
Sure. That's exactly what I was thinking right now.
Yeah, because it sounds like psychobabble. You're like,
sure.
What? Okay. Like, what does that actually mean? It means these are legal contracts. There are rules to the game. Both parties have responsibilities and limitations on what they can do and what they can't do. Right? So if we start talking about like deep cybersecurity services, like the MSSP side, that's a deeper discussion, because now we have to start going, okay, what's the definition of technology services? What services are you rendering versus what's actually being covered under the policy, right? Then you have to get into the exacting language. Then we have to say, okay, now we have to get into how far you can actually go to help a client after a cyber event. Before, you could, in good faith, actually start voiding your own insurance policy. So I'll give you an example. Basic business email compromise, mm-hmm. right? Client goes, hey, turns out somebody's been, hunting around my 85-year-old bookkeeper's email for the last 5-6 months.
Sure.
So the MSP goes, all right, cool. They go in, change the password, change the rules back, right? Maybe do some like rudimentary forensics, like, hey, do we see anything weird going or coming? No, guy, we didn't see anything. So then the client goes, all right, well, is this like a data breach that I've heard about? Or, I mean, what do I need to do? And the MSP goes, no, I don't think it's a data breach. I think you're fine. You could just kind of keep going back to doing what you're doing. Right? I changed the rules, changed the password, everything looks fine. Mm-hmm. Right? Well, you don't have coverage under a tech E&O policy for services rendered by an attorney. That's just not in there. I've never seen it in one. When you tell somebody, hey, this is not a data breach, right? A data breach is a legal term that actually varies. And this is what MSPs really would have no reason to know. Like, a data breach under the professional ethical standards of a law firm are different than the data breach standards under, let's say, the breach notification requirements for a CPA firm. They're just different. They have different wording, different outcomes. It's just different, right? Well, you as an MSP, how are you going to sit there on a stand if that goes sideways? And plaintiff's attorney goes, so tell me where you went to law school. And you're like, what are you talking about? He goes, well, you told my client in writing, this was not a data breach. Well, that's a legal term. Can you tell me what that means? An MSP is going to sit there and squirm. Mm-hmm. And they're going to go, because of your quasi-pseudo legal determination, my client did not notify their cyber insurer. It turns out there was actually a data breach. There was access and acquisition of covered information. Because of that, we had a late timeline when it came to breach notification. They got denial of coverage by their cyber insurer. Maybe a regulator's coming after them. And you can kind of see how it just like starts spiraling.
Sure. Yeah,
right?
That's wild.
So it's really, and this is like the stuff I love. I've actually made videos on all these points that we're talking about. So kind of the easy answer I'll say for the general MSP, right? Notwithstanding MSSP. For the general MSP, it's identify, contain, refrain, right? Identify, contain, refrain. So identify, if you see something, man, I'd say you have to say something.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say like, that's kind of a legal requirement.
And say something to the client and your insurance company.
Yeah, so just as far as like working with the client,
mm-hmm.
It's if you see something, you got to say something, right? And then contain, right? Is it a reasonable expectation that you see a ransomware event occurring, and instead of just saying, I'm not going to touch this, I don't want to do anything, right? You just shut it all down. I'd say that's a reasonable expectation, right? That as an expert in this area, you are doing your utmost to limit the damage in a reasonable way.
Mm-hmm.
From that point moving forward, for the average MSP, that's where you get to refrain, right? So it's identify, contain, refrain. From there, don't make legal determinations, right? I know you want to help your client, but they already screwed up, right? So now you have to start thinking about, one, your liability.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a deeper discussion there on written notice of circumstance versus what a claim is and how that plays out in the policy language. But two, right, this is where it goes back to the contract that we talked about before, where, man, you don't want to just hope that those guys have a cyber insurer, right? You want to contractually require them. Now, there's a bunch of nerdy reasons behind that, but pragmatically here, it's, hey, you should be able to, as an MSP, say, here's what we saw, here's what we did, right? So business email compromise. You told us there was a business email compromise. We went in, we changed the rules, right? We didn't see anything coming or going, but we're not full-blown forensics experts, right? We're your MSP. So we highly recommend you consider reaching out to your cyber insurer for further forensics expertise and legal assistance. Now, what you're doing there is you're transferring that risk back to the client as opposed to holding it onto yourself, right? And you're saying, like, hey, I'm here to help you, right? And we've helped you, but there's, a dentist and a neurosurgeon are both doctors,
mm-hmm.
but like they're very, you don't want doing the other guy's job.
Yes.
Then it's on your client to make that determination, right?
Mm-hmm.
What are they comfortable with? Do they want to spend their deductible on their cyber policy to go out and get this done? Or are they going to manage that risk? They're going to weigh it and they're going to say, well, maybe it could be all these other things. I think as a business owner, it was just a BEC. So no, don't worry about it.
What is BEC?
Right? That's just business email compromise.
Okay.
Right. So that was kind of a rudimentary scenario, but you can see where you just have to be careful, increasingly so. And for many MSPs, what I'll tell them is this can kind of sound scary, right? When I start talking about legal liability, making determinations, declarations of coverage, voiding your policy, et cetera. But really what it is you have to know the rules of the game, right? Don't play the game if you don't know the rules. Once you know the rules of the game, then you as a business owner, right, the guy running that MSP, you can say, all right, in this exact scenario over here, I'm comfortable bending the rules. In this exact scenario over here, man, I'm going to break the rules, right? Comfortable doing that. In this other scenario over here, I am playing by the rules. And it's very circumstantial, but at least you know you're doing that, right? As opposed to just potentially getting blindsided later on. Now, what MSPs have to realize, the general rule is that insurance people suck. Like, it's just kind of the fact of life. Like, we are not the Rhodes Scholars of the financial services world. Okay? So one, tech E&O for MSPs, that's a very specific thing, right? Like it is very specific, and as technical as this field is, it's like you got to know what you're doing. This is not like the State Farm guy down the road, because you have to know how these policies actually kind of play out in real life.
Sure.
What the MSP has to realize is the general rule is that insurance guys have no legal responsibility to read or advise on what they're selling. So you could have an MSP has no idea what's in this policy, and it's being sold to them by a guy who's never read it and probably couldn't understand it to begin with.
That's scary. That's really scary.
Which is one of the reasons why, I'll tell you something scarier here in a sec, but it's one of the reasons why I try to put out so much free material for MSPs. Because like if MSPs don't exist, our whole economy goes to shit.
Sure.
Like the average SMB in no way can run their computer systems. Right? There's only so many, oh, my nephew's really good with computer type folks out there, right? That we've all heard. Even assuming they're that good, there's only so many of them. They're not going to be looking at that system 24/7. Cyber insurance is plowing in, right? Adding more restrictions and requirements. And so we have to have MSPs. So I got a ton of free material. I don't even monetize my YouTube channel. I never will, because I just want to be able to tell people, hey, this material is free, right? Like I'm literally just here to help you, because you know what? An MSP runs my municipal water system.
Sure.
I have a vested interest in my children not being poisoned when they turn on the tap.
Sure.
Right? Like I have a vested interest in the nuclear power plant not getting overrun by some crazy hacktivist group or something.
Sure.
Right? So there's like all these kind of niche scenarios, and I just think it's really cool. I could talk about this stuff.
No, forever. I love it. So this is good. So now, and you touched on something before, and I want to be respectful of your time as we're kind of getting close to the hour here, and I could do this all day, every day, by the way. Is when an MSP engages a client, and I'm glad I came up with a list of questions that I'm never even going to ask, but maybe there's hopefully there'll be a day when you and I meet again over a Zoom or in person. Should the MSP be the one recommending a cyber policy to their clients, or is that something their current insurance provider should provide? And then what role does the MSP, because obviously the MSP needs the insurances that you've already mentioned, and business owner and all that. But at what point do they get, or do they say, hey, red flag, you should have some kind of policy in place as well. We're not running everything through my policy. My policy covers us. You need a policy for you. And then does the insurance company come back and say, here's the list of requirements that you have to then fulfill as an MSP with proof? What does that actually look like? Because I don't think a lot of people really even know what that looks like on that end.
Sure. So one, I would say contractually require your clients to carry cyber insurance.
Okay.
It's good for them and it's good for you as an MSP. If you get pushback, so I put out this video 2-3 years ago called Get Smart, and that was one of the recommendations, right? And I go through, hey, here's kind of the legal rationale roughly for why that even makes sense from the MSP's perspective. I got a lot of pushback on that. And then of course, 3 years later, it's super common. So always. I would say one, contractually require your clients carry that insurance. If you get pushback, right, number one is blame your own insurance company, because they're going to make it mandatory at a certain point for all MSPs. Two, I have an entire video. You could tell I was not an English major. It's 3 practical reasons why your MSP requires you to purchase cyber insurance. You'll find it on my YouTube channel. The easiest answer for an MSP there, right? If let's say you're my client, Harrison, right? And you go, Joe, why do I have to buy a cyber insurance policy? Don't I pay you a ton of money to keep me safe already? Right? And then in the back of their minds, they're thinking, dude, if you screw up, like that should be on you, right? Well, The easiest answer, I think, for most MSPs is to tell that client, actually, yeah, we do have our own insurance policy and we pay a lot of money for it. However, or I should say, we keep that policy in place because, like, hey, we're just humans, right? And there's a chance we screw up. And if we do, we want to be able to own up to it, make you whole again, right? We don't want you in the lurch. That being said, if you get hit with ransomware and then you bring a claim against our policy, that may take a year, 2 years, et cetera, for that to get resolved. And in the meantime, you might be out hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars potentially. Mm-hmm. Like, that could put your business under. That's not fair, right? Like, you know, once attorneys get involved, God knows what they're going to do. They're going to be, you know, stepping over dollars to argue about dimes. So, you know, that's not fair to you. So, client, like, I don't want you going out of business, right, until this whole thing gets resolved. So it makes sense for you to carry that policy. Now, I think the subtext when a client tells an MSP, I'm not going to buy cyber insurance, is, oh, well, if something goes wrong, I'll just sue you. I think that's what they're really saying, right? Because cyber insurance, it's still super affordable, really easy to get in the majority of cases for SMBs. Mm-hmm. So it's not like a crazy lift. Now, I'm trying to, what was the last? Oh, yes, last part of your question there. And then maybe we could do like a rapid fire for everything that's remaining. And I won't be so verbose here. So, you know, as far as MSPs, like, I think that kind of their duty ends with, you should go get cyber insurance, right? Like, MSPs should not be opining on policy language per se, right? So if a client goes, hey, what do you think's a better policy, A or B, right? It's, I'm not really qualified to say that, because there's a lot in there that, like, you just wouldn't know, right? Because it's just not what you do.
Sure.
It's not that you couldn't figure it out. It would just take you a crazy amount of time for something
it's just not worth. You're better off getting an expert involved.
Yeah, right. So you don't want to opine on policy language. In terms of vicarious liability, you got to be really careful about who you're recommending. So some of the largest insurance brokerages in the world, I mean, they're doing billions of dollars worth of revenue every year. I have had some of those people reach out to me and they said, dude, love your new video. We actually watch your videos for our employee training.
Love it.
So if those guys, I mean, which is cool. I'm like,
sure,
kind of
100%.
I'm tickled pink over here, right? But if those guys who have all the money and the resources in the world to make their own training program with all the best attorneys in the world, if they're watching Joe on YouTube, that means everybody below them, who knows what their training is like?
Sure.
Like,
sure.
They're just gonna have no idea, right? So when it comes to things like, I mean, and I will say the licensing process is so stupid for insurance folks. It's borderline negligence, because, like, every 2 years I have to take continuing professional education, and they ask me about homeowners insurance and auto insurance and
stuff you don't even sell.
That's why I write books. I'm like, if I need to know it, I'm going to write a book on it, and I'm going to research this thing into oblivion. So there's a lot of blind leading the blind out there, and you don't want to get between two blind guys having a sword fight, right? Like, it's not going to turn out well.
I'm not saying I would pay money to watch it, but I'm not saying I wouldn't pay money to watch it. That would be quite interesting. Okay, cool. That was a lot. You want to do some rapid fire?
Yeah, let's do rapid fire.
Sure. So with the rise of AI and cloud computing and obviously SaaS, you know, what are some tech insurancy industry trends currently going on? I mean, I think we've covered a good bit about it, but, like, where do you see insurance coming? Where do you think that, you know, they're going to say, hey, you got to step up to the plate, and, you know, you can't even start an MSP without insurance. You know, you can't even ride under the radar for a little while.
there's still a while till that happens because,
Okay.
I mean, MSPs, it's kind of the Wild West for MSPs, which is both really cool and freeing. Because you gotta remember, I work in the most heavily regulated industry in the world.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like it's crazy town over here with the stuff we got to do. So I would say, as far as insurance goes, I think that, it's going to be a long time until insurance is required of MSPs.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that being said, there's so many kind of new, ever-evolving risks that are out there for MSPs. Like, they would just be crazy to not get cyber insurance. To get tech E&O insurance and require their clients to have cyber insurance. As far as the insurance industry is going, I have a whole video called "The Good Days Are Gone," and I put that out like 2 years ago. So it's legacy hardware, software exclusions, critical vulnerability exclusions, zero-day exclusions are on there, widespread event exclusions. I have a new video coming out probably next week talking about cyber war exclusions. So that's going to be that's one of the top risks that the cyber insurance industry is looking at for 2024 is cyber war and how that will impact your clients. So it'd be good knowledge for everybody to know. That'll also be on tech E&O policies. So it's worth just kind of understanding what that is. But did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
What is the typical process for a tech company to file an insurance claim after a cybersecurity breach?
It depends. If you have the right type of policy, it's actually very straightforward. You submit a claim.
That's it. You just like a car accident, submit claim, done.
If you have the right type of policy and the right policy language.
Okay.
Right? It's, hey, I have a claim, need some help. If you don't, like I have some MSP clients, they're just so big, they can't get what's called an all risk policy, which means there are times where I end up having to sit down. They have a claim. I have to sit down with their general counsel and actually like help them handcraft a claim notification letter to the insurer. So I guess moral of the story there is be careful what you buy.
Fair enough. Let's see here. Where do you see the most significant gaps in coverage for tech companies, obviously specifically MSPs, and how do you address those? Is it really just that cyber, and tech E&O, or is there other stuff as well that you see gaps, and how does somebody even know that they're creating a gap in their insurance?
Ooh, yeah, I'd say the most significant gap. No, that was a good question. So I'd say the most significant gap is not understanding the Latin term of contra preferentum. Now, what does that mean? That means ambiguity is held against the draftsman or fault of the draftsman. I mean, it's Latin, so I'm not a big Latin aficionado, but that's the gist of it.
Sure.
Now, what does that mean? That means when you look at the definition of technology services within your tech E&O policy, you want something that's analogous to or says, right, such as including but not limited to, right?
Sure.
You don't want something that says technology services means and then a big long list, right? Because the rationale behind that is the big long list is called a named peril. So you have to fit within those bounds. So that's, hey, what a client has alleged and what services you rendered. It's got to fit within that paragraph.
Sure.
When you have something that's like including but not limited to, contra preferentum comes into play, which means, one, when you have a claim, you don't have to prove you're covered. You just submit it to the carrier. That means the carrier is on the hook legally to try and deny you a claim, which if they screw that up, there's enough zeros in that bad faith claim type lawsuit, you might just retire.
Sure.
But also you don't have to worry about the services you're rendering, right? So if it's technology services means IT services rendered to others for a fee, including but not limited to, they're saying, hey, we're covering every IT service unless we specifically exclude it.
Okay.
So, I think back to my time as an IT guy and I go, if you told me to write down everything I can do in a year, that's a hell of a list.
Sure.
Right. And technology has only gotten exponentially more complicated since I was, changing out keyboards. So that I think is probably the biggest oversight. And then past that, it's just not understanding what the policy means in real life.
Cool. And my last question is, and
Sure.
I don't want to go too far over, but for people that have to deal with regulatory agencies, right? I mean, you're in a regulatory agency, FINRA, FDIC, the HIPAA, the list goes on and on and on.
Sure.
Are there additional levels of insurance that they need? Is that a conversation that they should be having with an individual like yourself or their current insurance provider? Hey, I want to be a HIPAA compliant MSP. We went through the training of the compliancy group or Breach Secure Now, and and they gave us the seal of approval. But what does that look like on the insurance end for them, and how do they know that they're covered or safe?
Yeah. So, I mean, one, I would say HIPAA. I'm going to nerd out here for a sec.
Go for it.
If you go to the HHS OCR website, right, it will specifically tell you. It's in my book here somewhere. There is no certification process for HIPAA, right? So we kind of got to start from that assumption of, yes, you have these third-party providers. They're putting their stamp of approval on you
to say
that you're HIPAA compliant. But then, as IT folks, we'd nerd out and we'd say, compliance it's a journey, not a destination. So it's like, all right, well, it's kind of an amorphous thing, but let's play with it. Right?
Sure.
So I would say, if you are an MSP operating in regulatory environments, so imagine HIPAA, you have a business associate agreement, maybe some potential regulatory action from HHS OCR enforcing HIPAA high tech. Yeah, then that'll change the limits, because now I have to start thinking about the potential for regulatory action.
Sure.
Right. If your clients are in heavily regulated industries as well, that could also impact how much insurance you think you need. Because let's take, I'll dog on SolarWinds for a sec. So SolarWinds.
Going for the layup here. Yeah. I like it.
Yeah, shooting fish in a barrel. So SolarWinds, they're currently experiencing what I call the regulatory death spiral.
Okay.
So they had an event, regulators came in, that got some bad material into the sunshine. That brought rise to a class action claim. That brought more material to the forefront, which means the regulators are coming back in. And so you just need to be careful where, if your clients are, if they're bigger, if they're in heavily regulated industries, you got to start thinking, man, there's a lot of heat that could come down on those guys, which means there might be some pretty significant bills that your client would have to pay that they could turn around and say, hey, we don't even think it was your fault, but it's going to be your problem now. And the way that insurance works, maybe I would revise my previous answer to get this point in. The biggest problem MSPs have from a liability standpoint is, Harrison, your brain works like my brain. So if I came to you and I said, hey, I have no technology background whatsoever, how do I troubleshoot? Hardware, software, power. It's always one of those three.
Yep.
Okay. Then you go, hey, go fix this problem. And I'm just, pissing in the breeze, trying to troubleshoot. I check a voltage, and I come over here and I check a setting, and then I come over here and hit the hardware with the hammer. You're going to go, no. Logical, linear thought process.
Sure.
Start checking things off the list.
Sure.
Don't just shoot into the darkness.
Yep.
All right. And hope you hit the blind people sword fighting. So you don't do that. Well, and that's why we're not English majors. I skipped every poetry class, never impacted my life. So you guys think in a logical, linear thought process. It's very logical. Something happens at a client and you go, not my monkey, not my circus, as we'd say in the Navy. Or you go, not my fault, not my problem. That's not true. You got a business owner with a whole bunch of bills that they need to pay. They're going to be sitting there going, you know what? I have mouths to feed. I got people with mortgages. I've got people, with kids, they got to eat. If it's between their business going under versus suing you to try and recoup them some of that money, they're going to get an attorney. And I know these folks because I went to school with them. Their job is to zealously advocate on behalf of their client. Their job is to not make that determination if that's a just action or not. They're there to advocate on behalf of their client. And so just because you didn't do anything wrong doesn't mean it's not your problem. So start kind of working that into the, I'll say, culture of your MSP, right? So once you kind of understand that, everything becomes a lot clearer.
Love it. Love it, man. Look, I have another 27 questions left, but we don't have to burn through them right now. And that's totally fine. Cool. So, Joe, first, I appreciate the heck out of you for hanging out with me, talking about all this kind of stuff. I vow that we will get together in the future and do one, although I know you like the Zoom format here. I am a podcaster at heart, and I love in person. Tell people how they can find you, how they can get a hold of you, all that. Obviously, all the links are going to be down below, to your stuff, but, give yourself a shameless plug and what makes you unique.
Believe it or not, there's actually another insurance guy. I've never met him. Somewhere in the state of Ohio.
Okay.
That has like my exact first and last name.
Okay.
So like that dude, man, he must be killing it. I bet his coworkers were like, "Damn, Joe, all of a sudden you're just selling all this cyber insurance. What happened?" He's like, "I don't know, man. People just keep calling." So
he's like, I gotta be an expert real quick because there's some other guy with the same name as me that clearly knows a lot about this, and I gotta catch up.
They're like, yeah, to talk about this book I wrote, like crazy. But yeah, if you just like, how random is that? But if you just you can YouTube my name. I have like over 100 videos now. They keep growing on cyber insurance, cybersecurity law, stuff for MSPs. Reference some of those while we were talking here.
Sure.
You can find me on Amazon, YouTube, Reddit. I'm Joe_cyber. So I love jiu-jitsu and talking to MSPs. You can find me on LinkedIn. Yeah, I think that's a good start.
Love it. Love it. And if they want to reach out to you, they can buy insurance from you and all that good stuff as well.
Oh yeah, and I'll talk their ear off.
I love it. I love it.
I like this stuff too much.
If you're interested in getting some insurance for your MSP, I would highly recommend talking to Joe and at least starting the conversation, preferably a month out before your first new customer. But I have a feeling that some people are going to be watching and they are going to be crunching the time with you, brother.
Hey, happy to help. And I will say, like, I'm not licensed in every state, but I help everybody that comes through the door. So. Sure. If it's like a type of insurance I don't even sell, if they're in a state I don't even work in, like California, God bless California, they hate my business name for some reason, I'll still make sure those guys are taken care of.
Sure. And I assume you have partners or people to refer out in the states that you're not licensed in.
Oh, yeah.
Cool.
Yep.
Love it, man. Well, Joe, thank you so much, man. I appreciate you taking some time with me today, and I look forward to doing this again.
All right, Harrison, you take it easy.
Love it.